Julian Davenport was a man who measured the world in dollars and square feet. From his penthouse office overlooking the Chicago skyline, he could move markets with a single phone call. He had built an empire of steel and glass, a testament to his ruthless ambition. Yet all his wealth couldn't mend the one thing that was truly broken, his daughter's profound loneliness. 10-year-old Amelia was his world, a world confined to a wheelchair and silence. So when he saw a struggling waitress, a complete stranger, dancing with his vulnerable daughter on a restaurant patio, his world shattered into a million pieces of cold, hard fury. But the action he took next wasn't what anyone expected. It wasn't about money or power. It was an act that would redefine his entire existence and prove that sometimes the most valuable transactions have nothing to do with money at all. The Davenport residence in Lincoln Park wasn't a home. It was a monument, a sprawling gray stone mansion meticulously curated by an army of staff. It was less a place of comfort and more a gallery of Julian Davenport's success. Every surface gleamed, from the polished marble floors in the foyer to the crystal glasses in the bar that were never used. The air itself felt expensive, filtered and temperature-controlled, carrying the faint, sterile scent of lemon oil and loneliness. Julian Davenport at 45 was the architect of this gilded cage. His days were a relentless torrent of acquisitions, mergers, and hostile takeovers. He moved with a predator's economy of motion, his voice a low, commanding baritone that could make seasoned executives tremble. He wore tailored suits that cost more than most people's cars and a perpetual expression of grim determination. He was a king in his corporate kingdom, but within the silent walls of his mansion, he was just a man haunted by ghosts. The most prominent ghost was that of his late wife, Isabella. She had been the light, the laughter, the soul of their family. Isabella had seen the man beneath the magnate, the boy from a working-class neighborhood who had clawed his way to the top. She had filled their life with music, art, and an effortless warmth that Julian, for all his wealth, could never replicate. A sudden aneurysm had stolen her from them 2 years ago, and in her absence, the mansion had fallen into a permanent, hushed twilight. Then there was Amelia. Amelia Davenport was 10 years old and lived in a world of frustrating contrasts. She had a mind as sharp as her father's, full of vibrant colors, soaring melodies, and wild imaginative stories. But her body was a prison. Cerebral palsy had tethered her to a state-of-the-art wheelchair, since birth, her limbs refusing to obey the commands of her brilliant brain. Her voice was trapped too, a series of soft, uncontrolled sounds that couldn't form the words she longed to speak. Her only true means of expression was a sophisticated communication tablet mounted to her chair. With painstaking effort, using a head-tracking pointer, she could type out her thoughts, her sentences appearing on the screen in a crisp digital font. It was a lifeline, but a slow and arduous one. Often, by the time she'd composed a response, the conversation had moved on, leaving her feeling like a spectator in her own life. Julian loved his daughter with a fierce, desperate intensity, but his love was expressed in the language he understood best: money. Amelia had the finest physical therapists, the most advanced medical equipment, and a room filled with every conceivable toy and gadget a child could want. Her caregiver, a stern but competent woman named Mrs. Gable, attended to her every physical need with professional detachment. What Amelia didn't have was her father. Not really. Julian was a presence, a looming figure, who would kiss her forehead in the morning before his phone started ringing, and who would check on her at night after a 16-hour workday. He saw her as a precious, fragile project, a problem to be managed with resources. He scheduled her therapies, reviewed her medical reports, and approved her expenses with the same detached efficiency he applied to a new real estate development. He had forgotten how to just be with her. Isabella had known how. She would read to Amelia for hours, her voice rising and falling with the drama of the story. She would put Amelia's hands on the piano keys and guide them, creating clumsy but joyful melodies together. She would dance with her, holding Amelia in her arms and waltzing around the living room, whispering that in their hearts they were both ballerinas. Since Isabella's death, the dancing had stopped. The music had faded. Their one unbreakable ritual was Sunday brunch. Every Sunday at 11:00 a.m. sharp, Julian, Amelia, and Mrs. Gable would be seated at their regular table on the secluded terrace of the Gilded Sparrow, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants. It was an exercise in futility. Julian would spend most of the time on his phone closing deals or putting out fires, his brow furrowed. Amelia would sit silently, occasionally tapping out a one-word answer to his perfunctory questions. How was therapy? Fine. Do you like the pancakes? Yes, for Julian, this was fulfilling his duty as a father. He was providing, he was present. He didn't see the profound chasm of silence that separated them, a silence filled with unspoken grief and misunderstood intentions. He didn't see the look in Amelia's eyes as she watched other families laugh and talk their interactions easy and fluid. He saw only that she was safe, cared for, and provided for. To him, that was enough. It had to be. Across town in a cramped but vibrant apartment in the Pilsen neighborhood, another world turned. Kiara Johnson's life was a symphony of motion. At 22, she was perpetual energy. Her days began before dawn at a local dance conservatory, where she was on a partial scholarship, her dream of becoming a professional contemporary dancer, fueled by raw talent and sheer grit. The studio was her sanctuary, the place where she could translate her emotions, her struggles, her joys, her hopes into a language more powerful than words. Her body was her instrument, and she honed it with a discipline that bordered on religious fervor. But talent didn't pay the bills. Her scholarship covered tuition, but not rent, not food, not the point shoes that wore out every few weeks. Her grandmother, who had raised her and now lived with her, relied on a meager Social Security check. And so Kiara worked. She worked as a waitress at the Gilded Sparrow. It was a world away from her own. She put on a crisp uniform and a polite smile and served ridiculously expensive food to people who barely acknowledged her existence. She navigated the intricate politics of the staff, the demanding customers, and the condescending glare of the manager, Mr. Dubois, a man who worshipped wealth and feared any disruption to the restaurant's placid, moneyed atmosphere. Kiara hated the job, but she was good at it. She was observant, efficient, and possessed a deep, intuitive empathy. She could spot the couple on a nervous first date, the lonely tourist trying to feel important, the family celebrating a quiet milestone. She saw the little dramas playing out at every table. And for several months, she had seen the sad, silent trio at the corner table on the terrace. The powerful, distracted man in the expensive suit, the silent girl in the high-tech wheelchair, the uniformed nurse who looked on with an air of detached professionalism. Kiara felt a pang of sorrow for the girl every time she saw them. She saw the intelligence in her eyes, the flicker of curiosity that was so often extinguished by the sterile silence of her table. She saw a soul trapped behind a wall of technology and neglect, and her heart ached for her. She didn't know their names, but she knew their story. It was a story of wealth and poverty, not of money, but of connection. One Sunday in late August, the suffocating Chicago heat had finally broken, replaced by a perfect breezy afternoon. The terrace of the Gilded Sparrow was full. The air hummed with polite conversation and the clinking of silverware. Kiara was flying, balancing trays, taking orders, refilling glasses. As she passed the Davenport table, she noticed something different. Amelia wasn't looking at her plate of untouched eggs Benedict. Her gaze was fixed on the small grassy patch at the edge of the terrace, where the children of another family, a little boy and girl, were twirling and laughing, their movements clumsy and free. Amelia's head was tilted, a look of intense, painful longing on her face. Her fingers twitched on the joystick of her chair, a tiny, involuntary movement. Kiara saw it. In that moment, Amelia wasn't a disabled girl in a wheelchair. She was just a girl who wanted to dance. And Kiara Johnson, the girl whose soul was made of music and motion, felt a pull she couldn't ignore. Her shift was ending. She was tired. She should just clock out and go home. But she couldn't. Something in the universe had aligned their orbits, the grieving father, the trapped child, and the dancer who understood that movement was the same as breath. She untied her apron, took a deep breath, and started walking towards Amelia's table, an idea taking root in her heart, an idea that was either beautiful or incredibly foolish. She had no way of knowing it was an act that would set off an explosion. Julian Davenport was closing a deal. The call was from a rival developer, a man named Alistair Finch, who was trying to lowball him on a prime piece of riverfront property. Julian thrived on these confrontations. He paced the edge of the terrace, his back to Amelia's table, his voice a low, menacing purr into his phone. "Alistair, let's not insult each other," Julian said, his eyes scanning the skyline as if he already owned it. "My asking price is firm. You know the value. You know the zoning potential. Don't waste my time with sentimental appeals. He was in his element, a gladiator in a bespoke suit. He was completely oblivious to the small drama unfolding just 30 feet behind him. Mrs. Gable was discreetly scrolling through her own phone, her duty to watch Amelia momentarily eclipsed by a stream of social media updates. The table was an island of isolation. Kiara approached cautiously. She didn't go to the father or the nurse. She went directly to the person who mattered. She knelt, bringing herself down to Amelia's eye level, a gesture of respect that immediately set her apart from the towering adults who usually populated Amelia's world. "Hi there," Kiara said softly, her voice warm and genuine. Amelia's eyes, wide and expressive, snapped to her face, startled. No one ever spoke to her first. "My name is Kiara. I couldn't help but notice you watching the kids play." Amelia stared, her mind racing. She wanted to reply to say, "Yes, I was," but the process was too slow. Her fingers twitched near her head tracker. Kiara didn't need the tablet. She saw the answer in the girl's eyes. "They're having fun, aren't they?" She continued, her smile gentle. "There's a song playing. Can you hear it?" A soft jazz instrumental was wafting from the restaurant's outdoor speakers. It was subtle background music for most, but Kiara heard the rhythm in everything. Amelia gave the slightest of nods, a barely perceptible dip of her chin. "It has a nice beat," Kiara said. "You know, all dancing is feeling the beat inside you and letting it move you. It doesn't matter if you're on your feet or in a chair. The feeling is the same." This was a new concept for Amelia. Dancing was something other people did. It was a memory of her mother, a painful reminder of what she couldn't have. Yet the way this woman, this waitress with the kind eyes and the dancer's posture, spoke about it, it sounded possible. Kiara saw the flicker of curiosity, the spark of hope. This was the moment. She could back away or she could step forward. She chose to step forward. "I'm a dancer," Kiara whispered as if sharing a secret. "And I think you are too. I can see it. Would you? Would you like to dance with me right here?" Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs. Fear and a wild, thrilling excitement warred within her. She looked over at her father, still on his phone a world away. She looked at Mrs. Gable, engrossed in her screen. She was invisible. But this woman, Kiara, saw her. Truly saw her. Slowly, deliberately, Amelia moved her head and typed a single word onto her screen. The letters appeared stark and bright, "Yes." A brilliant, radiant smile broke across Kiara's face. "Okay," she said. "Here's what we'll do." She didn't grab the handles of the wheelchair like a piece of equipment. She placed one hand gently on the smooth metal of the armrest. "You're the lead," she instructed. "Feel the music. Let it tell your hands where to go. I'll follow." Kiara stood up and began to move. It wasn't a performance for anyone else. It was a conversation between the two of them. She swayed to the gentle rhythm of the jazz tune, her arms fluid, her body relaxed. Her movements were small, contained an invitation rather than a spectacle. She looked at Amelia's hands, which were resting in her lap. "Let your arms be light," Kiara encouraged. "Like they're floating on water." Hesitantly, Amelia tried. She focused all her concentration, all her will on her left arm. It was a monumental effort. The muscles, usually tight and uncooperative, trembled. But then a small miracle occurred. Her arm lifted an inch, then two. Her hand, usually curled into a fist, softened slightly. Kiara's eyes shone. "That's it, beautiful." Kiara mirrored the movement, lifting her own arm in a graceful arc that completed the gesture Amelia had started. She began to circle the wheelchair, her steps light and silent on the stone patio. She moved in front of Amelia, then behind her, her arms creating shapes in the air that seemed to flow from Amelia herself. "Now let's travel," Kiara said. She placed her hands lightly on the back of the wheelchair. "You steer with your heart." She pushed the chair forward a few feet, then spun it in a slow, gentle circle, perfectly in time with a swell in the music. For the first time in years, Amelia felt the sensation of movement that wasn't clinical or functional. It was joyful. It was free. The wind light and warm brushed against her face. She closed her eyes, and for a glorious moment, she wasn't a girl in a wheelchair. She was a bird. She was a leaf on the wind. She was her mother's daughter dancing. A genuine, uninhibited smile spread across Amelia's face. A small, happy sound, a pure note of glee escaped her lips. Kiara heard it, and her heart soared. She took Amelia's hands in hers, her touch firm but gentle. She guided Amelia's arms in a wide, sweeping motion, lifting them up toward the sky as the song reached its crescendo. It was a moment of pure, unscripted magic. A 5-minute ballet of kindness and connection on the sun-drenched patio of a place that was usually devoid of both. It was at that exact moment that Julian Davenport ended his call. "Fine, Alistair. Send the revised offer to my office. We're done here." He turned a triumphant, predatory smile on his face from having won his negotiation. And then he saw it. His perspective was skewed. He didn't see the gentle beginning. He didn't see the hesitant invitation or Amelia's joyful consent. He saw a stranger, a waitress in a uniform with her hands on his daughter. He saw her manhandling Amelia's wheelchair, yanking her arms up in the air. He saw his fragile, vulnerable, disabled child being used as some kind of prop-a plaything for a low-wage worker's amusement. The triumphant smile vanished, replaced by a mask of glacial fury. The air around him seemed to drop 20 degrees. Every protective instinct, every ounce of his grief-fueled rage ignited. In his mind, this was a monstrous violation, an attack on the one pure thing he had left in the world. He didn't shout. He didn't run. He began to walk towards them, his steps deliberate and heavy, his eyes burning with a cold fire. Mrs. Gable finally looked up from her phone, saw the scene, and Mr. Davenport's expression, and her face went pale with dread. Amelia saw him coming. She saw the look on his face, a look she knew all too well. It was the look he wore when a deal went bad, when an employee failed him. The joy on her face dissolved into terror. She tried to type to explain, but her hands were still in Kiara's, and her body was frozen with fear. The music was still playing, but the dance was over. A storm was about to break. Julian reached them in 5 long, menacing strides. His shadow fell over Kiara and Amelia, eclipsing the afternoon sun. "Get your hands off my daughter," he said. The words were not shouted. They were spoken in a low, lethal tone that was far more terrifying. It was the voice of absolute, unquestionable authority. Kiara immediately let go of Amelia's hands and stepped back, her heart pounding. The shift in atmosphere was so sudden, so violent, it was like being plunged into ice water. She looked from Julian's face contorted with rage to Amelia's, which was now a mask of fear. "Sir, I'm so sorry, we were just—" Kiara began, her voice trembling slightly. "I know exactly what you were just doing." Julian cut her off, his voice dripping with contempt. He gestured dismissively at Kiara, as if swatting away an insect, his focus entirely on his daughter. "Amelia, are you all right? Did she hurt you?" Amelia shook her head frantically, her eyes wide with panic. She reached for her tablet's controller, desperate to form the words to make him understand. "No, Dad, it was wonderful. She was nice." "Don't be mad." But her fine motor control, always a challenge, completely deserted her under the weight of his fury. Her hands shook, and the cursor on the screen danced erratically. "Mrs. Gable!" Julian barked, not even looking at the caregiver. "Get over here! Where were you?" Mrs. Gable scurried over, her face ashen. "Mr. Davenport, I was right here. I only looked down for a moment. I am so sorry, sir." "A moment is all it takes," he seethed. He turned his venom back on Kiara. "What in God's name did you think you were doing? Do you have any idea of her condition? The fragility of her state? You think it's funny? You think it's amusing to treat her like a puppet for your own sick entertainment?" The accusation struck Kiara like a physical blow. "No, never. That's not what happened," she protested, finding a sliver of her voice. "She was watching the other children. She looked like she wanted to. I just wanted to share the music with her." "Already share the music." Julian let out a short, brutal laugh that had no humor in it. "You're a waitress. Your job is to take orders and bring food. You are not a therapist. You are not a friend. You are nothing to us. You had no right to touch her, no right to interfere." He was causing a scene now. Diners at nearby tables were starting to stare, their polite conversations faltering. Mr. Dubois, the manager, had seen the commotion from the doorway and was now hurrying over, his face a mixture of panic and obsequiousness. "Mr. Davenport, is there a problem here, sir?" Dubois asked, his gaze darting nervously between the furious millionaire and his now terrified waitress. "There is a problem, Dubois," Julian said, his voice dangerously calm. "This employee of yours took it upon herself to accost my disabled daughter. I want her fired. Not tomorrow, not in an hour. I want her fired right now, and I want her escorted off the premises." The blood drained from Kiara's face. Fired just like that for an act of kindness. Sir, please, she pleaded, her voice cracking. That isn't fair. Ask your daughter. She'll tell you. All eyes turned to Amelia. She was crying now, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. She was pounding her fist against the side of her chair in frustration, making small, choked sounds. She was trapped in her silent prison, unable to defend the one person who had managed to break through its walls. Her helplessness only fueled Julian's rage, confirming his narrative that she was a victim. She doesn't need to tell me anything, Julian said coldly. I saw what I saw. Dubois, are you going to handle this, or do I need to reevaluate my patronage of this establishment? I imagine the board of directors would be very interested to hear about how your staff harasses your clientele. The threat was clear and effective. Mr. Dubois withered. His loyalty was not to his staff. It was to the money and prestige that Julian Davenport represented. Of course, Mr. Davenport. Right away, sir. My deepest apologies, Dubois said, turning to Kiara. His previous anxiety was gone, replaced by a cold managerial fury. Johnson, my office now. Mr. Dubois, you can't, Kiara whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. This is a misunderstanding. My office, he snarled. Then he forced a sickly smile for Julian. She will be dealt with, sir. I assure you, completely unacceptable. Kiara stood frozen for a moment, her world tilting on its axis. She looked at Julian's implacable face, at Mr. Dubois' cowardice, and finally at Amelia. The girl's tear-streaked face was a portrait of despair. Their 5 minutes of magic had been shattered, and all that was left were the jagged, ugly pieces. With one last heartbroken look at Amelia, Kiara turned and walked toward the restaurant, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Julian watched her go, a grim satisfaction on his face. Justice as he saw it had been served. He had protected his daughter. He had vanquished the threat. He turned back to Amelia, his expression softening slightly. It's okay, sweet girl, he said, reaching out to wipe a tear from her cheek. She's gone now. You're safe. Amelia recoiled from his touch. It was a small movement, but for Julian, it was a thunderclap. She had never pulled away from him before. He froze, his hand hovering in the air. He looked into her eyes and saw something he had never seen there before. Not fear, not sadness, but a deep, burning resentment. It was an accusation. She finally gained control of her hand and began to type on her screen, her movements jerky and furious. Each letter was a stab. After a moment, she angled the screen towards him. 3 words blazed in the center of the display. I hate you! The words hit Julian Davenport with more force than any physical blow. He stumbled back, his face slack with shock. Hate his daughter. The center of his universe, the person for whom he had built an empire. The reason for his every waking effort. It was impossible. It was incomprehensible. He looked at her again, searching for some mistake, some other explanation. But there was no mistaking the raw anguish and anger in her eyes. The waitress wasn't the one who had hurt her. He was. Without another word, Julian signaled for Mrs. Gable to follow, and pushed Amelia's wheelchair toward the exit, leaving behind a trail of stunned silence, a half-eaten brunch, and the wreckage of his own making. The ride home was conducted in a silence more profound and terrible than any they had ever shared. Julian drove his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The 3 words from Amelia's tablet burned into his mind. Back in the mansion, the silence was a physical weight. Amelia went straight to her room, with Mrs. Gable refusing to even look at her father. She refused her dinner. She refused her physical therapy exercises. She simply sat in her chair, facing the window, a small, defiant statue of misery. Julian retreated to his cavernous study, the one place he usually felt in control. But the mahogany desk and leather-bound books offered no comfort. He poured himself a glass of expensive scotch, the amber liquid doing nothing to dull the sharp edges of his new reality. He had won. He had gotten the waitress fired. He had asserted his power. But in doing so, he had declared war on his own daughter and suffered the most devastating loss of his life. He swirled the scotch in his glass, the reflection of a powerful, successful, utterly broken man staring back at him. He kept replaying the scene in his head, the waitress, his daughter's arms in the air, her face. He paused. Her face. In his rage, he had only seen a victim. But what had her expression been before she saw him? He tried to recall it, to push past the red curtain of his anger. He remembered a smile, A wide, genuine, unrestrained smile. A sound too. A happy sound. A sliver of doubt, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through his self-righteousness. Was it possible could he, in his ferocious need to protect her, have completely and catastrophically misunderstood? The thought was so terrifying, he pushed it away and took another long drink of his scotch. It was easier to believe he was right than to confront the possibility that he had just destroyed a moment of his daughter's rare happiness. The days that followed were the bleakest Julian had ever known, surpassing even the initial shock of Isabella's death. The mansion, once merely silent, was now actively hostile. Amelia's defiance was quiet but absolute. She communicated only when necessary, her tablet producing curt one-word answers. She did her schoolwork, she attended her therapies, but the light in her eyes had been extinguished. She was a ghost haunting the long hallways of their home. The wall between them was made of more than just her silence. It was made of his pride. Julian Davenport did not admit when he was wrong. In his world, admissions of error were weaknesses to be exploited. He told himself he had done the right thing, that he had acted as any loving father would. He repeated it to himself like a mantra, but the words rang hollow in the suffocating quiet of the house. His breaking point came a week later. It was a Thursday evening, and he had come home early, a rare occurrence. He walked past Amelia's room and heard the faint sound of music. Peeking inside, he saw her sitting before her large computer monitor. On the screen was a grainy, shaky cell phone video. It was a recording of a ballet Giselle. He watched as the dancers seemed to float across the stage, their movements ethereal and perfect. Amelia was utterly transfixed, her face a heartbreaking canvas of longing. He remembered then with a pang that stole his breath how Isabella had loved the ballet. She had taken Amelia once when she was very small. Isabella had held her in the box seats, narrating the story in a whisper, bouncing her gently on her knee, in time with the orchestra. "You feel that, Mia," she would say. "That's the music in your soul. You just have to let it out." Watching Amelia now, Julian realized he hadn't just fired a waitress. He had stamped out an echo of Isabella. He had punished his daughter for seeking the very thing her mother had always encouraged her to find: joy in movement. The foundation of his certainty began to crumble. That night, unable to sleep, he found himself in his study again. He pulled out a box of Isabella's things he had never been able to bring himself to sort through. Inside, beneath photo albums and old letters, was her journal. His hands trembled as he opened it. He flipped to one of the last entries, dated a month before she died. "Spoke with Dr. Anya Sharma today about Amelia's progress. The usual clinical talk, range of motion, muscle tone, etc. But I asked her something different. I asked, will she ever be happy? Anya was taken aback. She said we provide her with everything. I know that, but I see the sadness in my daughter's eyes. She's trapped. My biggest fear isn't what her body can't do. It's that she'll forget what her spirit can. I pray someone someday will see past the chair and the silence and find the dancer I know is inside her. Someone who will help her feel the music again." The words blurred as tears welled in Julian's eyes. He closed the journal, the leather cool against his skin. Someone who will see past the chair and find the dancer inside. Kiara Johnson hadn't been mocking Amelia. She had been answering Isabella's prayer. The realization was not a gentle dawn. It was a seismic shock, shattering the carefully constructed edifice of his pride and anger. He saw his actions for what they were: not protective, but selfish; not righteous, but cruel. He hadn't been protecting Amelia from a stranger. He had been protecting himself from the painful reminder that he couldn't give his daughter the one thing she truly needed. He had to fix it. But how? He didn't even know the waitress's last name. He had been so dismissive he hadn't even bothered to learn it. The next morning, Julian Davenport did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He cleared his entire schedule. He told his secretary to cancel all his meetings. He was a man on a mission, but his usual resources, money and power, felt clumsy and inadequate for this task. His first stop was the Gilded Sparrow. He walked in at 10 a.m. when the staff was setting up for lunch service. Mr. Dubois saw him and came rushing over, his face beaming. "Mr. Davenport, a pleasure to see you again, sir. Your usual table on Sunday." "I'm not here for brunch, Dubois." Julian said, his tone flat and serious. "I'm here about the waitress I had you fire last Sunday. I need her name and her contact information." Dubois' sycophantic smile faltered. The waitress, Sir Johnson, I'm afraid that's against company policy. Employee privacy. Julian fixed him with a stare. I am not asking for your company's policy. I am telling you to give me her information. I made a mistake, and I intend to correct it. Your cooperation would be wise. The implied threat was all it took. Dubois scurried to his office and returned a minute later with a slip of paper. Kiara Johnson, it read, followed by a phone number and an address in Pilsen. Julian's second stop was his own security firm. He made a call to the head of his corporate security team, a former FBI agent named Peterson. Peterson, I need you to do something for me. Discreetly, Julian said into his phone as he drove. The Gilded Sparrow. I need the security camera footage from the terrace last Sunday between 11:30 a.m. and 12:30 p.m. I don't want the manager to know you're pulling it. Get it to me within the hour. An hour later, an encrypted file arrived on his laptop. He parked his car in a quiet side street and opened it. There it was, the entire scene captured from a high-angle camera. He watched his stomach churning as the objective, silent footage told the real story. He saw Kiara's gentle approach. He saw her kneel to speak with Amelia. He saw Amelia's slow, deliberate consent typed on the screen, and then he saw the dance. It was nothing like the monstrous scene he had concocted in his mind. It was beautiful. It was tender. He saw Kiara's respectful guidance, and most importantly, he saw his daughter's face. It was illuminated with a pure, unadulterated joy he hadn't seen since Isabella was alive. He watched Kiara spin the chair, saw Amelia throw her head back and smile at the sky. He saw the moment of shared triumph as they raised their arms together. Then he saw himself enter the frame, a dark, furious figure radiating rage. He watched himself berate the young woman, humiliate her, and have her fired. He watched his daughter's joy turn to terror, then to heartbreak. The video was irrefutable proof. He wasn't the hero of this story. He was the villain. Shame, hot and profound, washed over him. He closed the laptop, feeling sick to his stomach. Isabella's words echoed in his mind. Find the dancer inside. Kiara Johnson had found her, and he had tried to destroy her for it. Now he had her address. It was time to face the consequences of his actions. He put the car in gear and drove towards Pilsen, a neighborhood whose existence he had barely acknowledged before. He was entering a world far from his own, not as a conqueror or a developer, but as a penitent man searching for a way to undo the damage he had done. He was about to find that an apology was only the beginning. The drive to Pilsen was like a journey to another country. Julian's sleek black sedan, a vessel of silent air-conditioned luxury, seemed alien on the vibrant streets, cruising past colorful murals, bustling bodegas, and brownstone walk-ups with laundry lines strung between them. This was a world of community of life, lived out in the open, so different from the sterile privacy of Lincoln Park. He found the address a modest three-flat building with a weathered facade. He parked, drawing curious glances from passers-by, and took a deep breath. His heart was pounding harder than it did before a billion-dollar negotiation. He walked up the steps and found the name K. Johnson next to apartment 2B. He pressed the buzzer. After a moment, a voice crackled through the intercom. Hello. It was an older woman's voice, warm but cautious. Hello. Julian said, his own voice sounding foreign and stiff. I'm looking for Kiara Johnson. My name is Julian Davenport. There was a long pause. Kiara isn't here, the voice said, the warmth gone, replaced by a defensive chill. And we have nothing to say to you. The intercom clicked off. Julian stood there stumped. He hadn't anticipated this. He had assumed he would be granted an audience. He rang the buzzer again. No response. He was used to doors opening for him. This one was firmly shut. He could leave. He could go back to his empty mansion and his silent daughter and let the poison of his mistake continue to fester. Or he could wait. For the first time in his adult life, he chose to be patient. He went back to his car parked across the street, where he had a clear view of the entrance, and waited. An hour passed, then 2. He watched the life of the neighborhood unfold. Children playing stickball in the street, neighbors chatting on their stoops, the smell of grilling food wafting through the air. It was a world of connections he had long forgotten how to forge. Just after 6 p.m. he saw her. Kiara Johnson was walking down the street carrying a bag of groceries. She looked tired, the vibrant energy he'd seen on the terrace dulled by worry. He got out of the car and walked to meet her on the sidewalk. She saw him and froze, her body instantly tensing. Her hand tightened on her grocery bag. "Miss Johnson." Julian began, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. "Kiara, please just give me 5 minutes of your time. That's all I ask." Kiara's eyes were guarded, her expression a mixture of fear and resentment. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice quiet but strong. "You've already gotten me fired. Are you here to make sure I don't get another job in this city?" "No," Julian said, shaking his head. The accusation, though understandable, stung. "Nothing like that. I came here to apologize." Kiara stared at him, skeptical. "To apologize?" "Yes, I was wrong. Completely, unequivocally, and horribly wrong." He said the words feeling clumsy but necessary. "What I did to you was inexcusable. I misunderstood everything, and I acted out of my own fear and grief. I saw the security footage. I saw what really happened. It was a beautiful thing you did for my daughter, and I destroyed it. I am truly deeply sorry." His apology was raw and direct. There was no corporate polish, no condescension. He was just a man admitting a terrible fault. Kiara listened, her defensive posture softening just a fraction. She could see the genuine shame in his eyes. "My grandmother let me know you stopped by," she said quietly. "She was worried." "I understand. I deserve your suspicion," Julian said. "But my apology isn't enough. I know that. Words are easy. I came here to make things right." He paused, gathering his thoughts. This was the moment. "I did some research after I left the restaurant," he continued. "I found the conservatory you attend. I read about your scholarship. I know what your dream is." Kiara's eyes narrowed again. "What are you getting at? You're not going to try and buy me off. Are you a little hush money to soothe your conscience?" "No," Julian said firmly. "This isn't about me. This is about you, and it's about my daughter Amelia. You gave her 5 minutes of joy that I haven't been able to give her in 2 years. You saw her, the real her, the person trapped inside. My late wife, she always said there was a dancer inside Amelia. You were the only other person to ever see it." His voice cracked slightly on the mention of his wife, a moment of vulnerability that did more to convince Kiara of his sincerity than anything else. "I have a proposal for you," he said, his voice regaining its usual confidence, but this time it was tempered with humility. "It's not a job as a waitress or even as a private tutor. It's bigger than that. I want to start a foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing adaptive dance and movement therapy for children with physical and neurological disabilities. I will provide all the funding, the space, the equipment, the staff, everything. I want to call it the Isabella's Grace Foundation, after my wife." Kiara was speechless, staring at him as if he'd just started speaking another language. "I have the money," Julian went on, "but I don't have the soul for it. I don't have the vision. You do. I want you to run it. I want you to be the creative director. I will pay for the completion of your conservatory degree, and then I will pay you a salary to build this program from the ground up. You can design the curriculum, hire the instructors, and create a space where children like my daughter can feel the joy of movement. A joy you showed her was possible. You won't be working for me. You'll be my partner in this." He finished, and the silence on the bustling street seemed to press in on them. Kiara was just staring, her mind reeling. It was an insane, impossible offer. It was a fairy tale. It was the answer to every prayer she'd ever whispered in the dark after a grueling day of classes and work. The chance to dance, to teach, to make a real difference without the constant crushing weight of financial struggle. "Why?" she finally managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. "Why me?" "Because you didn't see a disability. You saw a person," Julian said simply. "You didn't see a rich man's daughter. You saw a little girl who wanted to dance. You have the one thing my money can't buy: empathy. My daughter needs you, and I think there are hundreds of other kids in this city who need you too." Tears welled in Kiara's eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of overwhelming, disbelieving hope. She thought of her grandmother, of her worn-out point shoes, of the dream that had always felt so far away. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Say you'll think about it," Julian said gently. He pulled a business card from his wallet. "This is my personal cell number. No assistants, no gatekeepers. Call me when you have an answer." He handed her the card. Their fingers brushed, and it was a simple human contact a world away from the violent confrontation a week earlier. Without another word, he turned and walked back to his car, leaving Kiara standing on the sidewalk, a grocery bag in one hand and an impossible future in the other. The next afternoon, Julian was in his study, staring at the silent phone when it finally rang. He answered on the first ring. "Hello, Mr. Davenport," he said, Kiara's voice clear and steady. "I have two conditions." Julian felt a surge of relief. "Anything." "First," she said, "I want to see Amelia. I need to talk to her and make sure this is what she wants too." "Of course," Julian said immediately. "That's more than fair." "And the second condition," there was a pause. "You have to be there too," Kiara said, "for the classes. Not as a benefactor watching from a window, but as a father. You have to learn to dance with your daughter." Julian was silent. It was the one thing he hadn't considered. It was terrifying. It meant being present, being vulnerable, being a father in the way Isabella had been a mother. It was the hardest condition she could have named. "Okay," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Okay, Kiara. It's a deal." A week later, Kiara Johnson walked back into the Davenport mansion. But this time she wasn't an intruder. She was an honored guest. She went to Amelia's room where the girl was waiting, her eyes wide with nervous hope. Kiara knelt just as she had before. "Hi, Amelia," she said softly. "I missed you." Amelia's fingers flew across her tablet's keyboard, her movements fluid and excited. "I missed you too." Dad was stupid. Kiara and Julian, who was standing awkwardly in the doorway, both let out a small laugh. The ice was broken. The final scene of their old story and the first of their new one took place not in a sterile mansion or an exclusive restaurant, but 6 months later in a bright, airy dance studio in the heart of the city. Sunlight streamed through massive windows. The floor was a soft, yielding material, and one wall was covered in mirrors. The sign on the door read, "The Isabella's Grace Foundation." Inside, a dozen children with various disabilities moved through the space. Some were in wheelchairs, others used walkers. Some moved with the uncontrolled grace of their conditions. And leading them all was Kiara, her voice a warm guide, her movements an inspiration. Amelia was in the center of it all. Her new custom-built dance wheelchair moved with a fluidity she'd never known. Her face was alight with concentration and pure, unadulterated happiness. And in the corner of the room, looking slightly awkward but utterly present, was Julian Davenport. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't closing a deal. He was watching his daughter, a true, genuine smile on his face. When the music swelled, he walked over to her, took her hand, and began to move with her, clumsy but willing. He was finally learning to dance. He had traded his empire of glass and steel for the small room filled with music and laughter, and in doing so had finally found something that was truly priceless. That is the story of Julian, Amelia, and Kiara. It's a powerful reminder that our first impressions are so often wrong, clouded by our own fears, prejudices, and pain. Julian Davenport had all the money in the world, but he was emotionally bankrupt until a kind stranger showed him the true meaning of wealth. Kiara Johnson had very little, but her richness of spirit was enough to change lives. And Amelia, a girl trapped in silence, taught them all that the most profound communication doesn't require a voice. Their story asks us to look past the surface, past the wheelchair, the uniform, the expensive suit, and see the human being within. It challenges us to choose empathy over anger and to believe in the power of a second chance. If this story of transformation and kindness moved you, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share it with someone who might need to hear a message of hope today. And of course, if you want more real-life stories that inspire and make you think, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell. Thank you for listening.